All right, I'll be pretty fast. So I know it's between you and beer or dinner or whatever. So we've done this presentation a couple of times. I did it at Ongo Alliance last summer. I think PJ did it at one of these for a few months ago, and this is the latest update. And this is where we give statistics of how many deployments and various things about CBRS. Geez, okay, let me get through this. So this will be the last time I do the presentation because I don't have access to FAD data anymore. So, you know, for what it's worth, the next person who does this will be somebody else, Arful, PJ, somebody like that. What I'm presenting here is based upon the FAD data of March 7th, 2025. So FAD is full activity dump. It's the data that all of the SaaSes exchange every night about each other's CBSD. So each SaaS then has a complete record of what the CBRS ecosystem looks like. And from that, we can extract statistics. There are a lot of information in the FAD. There's some data that are not in the FAD, like the operator and things like that. That's private to the SaaS. But there's a lot of other data that's very useful. So the first thing is sort of the bulk data. How many CBSDs are there? And let me explain what the count means. It's the number of CBSDs that have at least one or more unexpired grants. So in the FAD, there's actually more CBSDs than this, but some of them, many of them have expired grants and are not operating. You will notice, so right now, you know, as of the March 7th FAD, we had just over 400,000 CBSDs, 401,257. What was that? Okay, now it's 400. Thank you. You'll probably be doing this next, Masood. You'll notice that, so these were data that I actually manually downloaded every day while I was at Google from our Google servers. And you'll notice there are, you know, periods of time where I fell asleep at my desk or something like that, and I wasn't downloading them every day, but you get the overall idea of the trend. And you see some occasional dropouts here. That's due to SaaSes having problems exchanging data among one another for that night or whatever. So it's not a real sudden decrease in the number of CBSDs. The one thing you will see is that there's this discontinuity up here around, I don't know, October of 2024 or so, October, November. That was because we realized, the SaaS operators realized that there were a fairly large, about 20,000 CBSDs in the FAD that did not have, that had unexpired grants, but they hadn't heartbeat for a really long time. So we decided we would stop counting those CBSDs because obviously they may have a valid grant, but they're obviously not doing anything. So we took those out. That's what the discontinuity is there. Let's see, what else did I want to say about this? A little bit of warning. I know NTIA, hold on one second, Masood. NTIA, I think, does a quarterly report about, or is it NIST? It's NIST that does, NTIA does a quarterly report about the count of CBSDs. Their numbers are wrong, and it's not their fault. The reason, they're not wrong, it's that they don't filter out the they don't get a list of CBSDs that have unexpired grants. So they're also counting CBSDs that have only expired grants, which I do not count in this count here. So their numbers are going to be bigger than what's shown here. And I think, you know, I've kind of mentioned we need to somehow right size that count, but not make it look like suddenly there was a big decrease in the number of CBSDs. So that's not for me to figure out anymore. So good luck, NTIA and Masood. You guys can figure it out. Masood.
You mentioned that this is very important because some people, when they are looking at that, they go from NIST and look at the number of CBSDs now, and they say there hasn't been any increase in the number of CBSDs, and people think that CBRS is not growing. That is not correct.
That's right. Yeah.
And as you said, it was not NIST's problem. It was our problem because of that interpretation.
It was our problem. Yeah. Yeah. We're, you know, the SaaS administrators learned a lot about counting CBSD. It's not, you would think counting CBSDs is easy, but there's actually more to it than meets the eye. So I've tried to make these numbers be, you know, as to actually accurately reflect the number of operating CBSDs there are out in the ecosystem. So as Masood said, as of now, there's 410, so we've had 9,000 more added since March 7th. So interesting statistic, breakdown between category A and category B. Hardly any are category A. About 3.9% of the total CBSDs out there, of those 401,000 CBSDs, are category A CBSDs. The other 96.1% are category B, which have to be outdoor. Category A's can also be outdoor, but I'll show you in a minute that actually they're indoor, but they can be outdoor below 6 meters. So the overwhelming majority of CBSDs are category B. And then if you look at the indoor versus outdoor, yes, the slide has changed. The indoor CBSDs is also 3.9%. So that tells you, to within, rounding errors, all of the category A's are indoors. Virtually all of the category A are indoors. And so the indoor deployments, only about 3.9% of the total of the CBSD deployments. We'd like to see that number come up. So, something to, yeah.
I thought we have a whole stack of CBSDs that were Cat A.
Not that I know of. Yeah, they're all outside. Yes, Manisha.
From the last report, they said that number is low, but it was growing faster than outdoor. Is that still the case?
No. Last time I looked at my slides, last time it was 4.1%. Now it's 3.9%. So the actual numbers may have grown a little bit. Percentage has actually dropped. I didn't look at the numbers, but the percentage has dropped slightly. So
do you also capture, I don't know how you would define it, by diversity of locations? Because I can imagine the indoor CBSDs would be fewer than outdoors just because they're covering smaller spaces.
Right.
But is there a growth in the, location?
You could determine that because the FAD has latitude and longitude and things. There's sensitivity among the SAS administrators about displaying anything to do with in fact, we're not supposed to really
Just
yeah.
numbers.
Yeah.
About,
the short answer is no. Yeah. But we could get that information. Masood.
Actually, sorry, I apologize. I know that it's your presentation. I don't mean to.
No, my presentations are always your presentations, Masood.
Yeah, I apologize. So,
yeah. I've learned this.
Just in ongoing alliance meeting, we had a map showing the number of CBSTs and number of even channels used, total megahertz used per county. So that number is available. We are going to publish that on ongoing alliance site, and then we'll see how we can make it available in WInnForum.
Yeah, I think, first of all, are you going to break that down category A and B? And second of all, is it granular enough that you can see increasing use of category A's in particular areas inside? Yeah, okay, yeah.
That's available, we can do it.
Yeah. So this is showing the statistics of grants that are given to a CBSD. So one thing important to remember, a CBSD is not called a PAL CBSD or a GAA CBSD. It's not based upon the CBSD. A CBSD can be either PAL or GAA or both. It just depends on the frequency grants it's been given by a SAS. So this is a breakdown in the percentages of frequency grants that have been given out to those CBSD. So a CBSD can have, again, it can have PAL grants, it can have GAA grants, or it can have a combination of both. It can have more than one frequency grant. And yeah, so you get the idea. It's not the CBSD, it's the frequency grants that determine whether it's PAL or GAA. So 33% of CBSDs have one or more PAL grants. So a third of CBSDs have one or more PAL grants. 95% of CBSDs have one or more GAA grants. 28% of CBSDs have both types of grants. 5% of the CBSDs only have PAL grants, and 67% only have GAA grants. So you get the breakdown. GAA is obviously the more heavily used grant type compared with PAL.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Is it fair to assume that most of the indoor CAT-As were GAA? No? Okay.
No. Actually, I have a
Okay.
a chart that addresses that. I think we'll find out in a minute. Yeah. So yeah, the next chart right here. So this is the number of grants. So there's 228,000 something PAL grants. There's 981,000 GAA grants. So total grants right now, or as of March 7th, was a little over 1.2 million grants given to those 400,000 CBSDs. So the average number of grants per CBSD turns out to be 3.0 to within rounding error. And interestingly, the median number of grants per CBSD, so half have more, half have less, is 2.0. So it gives you an idea of how many grants an individual CBSD has. So if you look, the category A GAA grants are much greater in number than the category A PAL grants. So most of those category A grants are GAA, interestingly enough. And then you see the comparative statistic. Most of the grants for category B are PAL. Well, no, not the way to look at it. Yeah, most of the, yeah. Well, so there's a total of 228,000 PAL grants, but 220, all but 500 of those are category B. So there's very few category B, category A PAL grants. Okay, so the total granted bandwidth per CBSD. So the cluster on the left represents all CBSDs. The minimum grant possible is 5 megahertz. That's what the standard supports is 5 megahertz is the minimum size grant, half a channel, half a CBRS channel. The maximum that's supported in the standard is 150 megahertz. So in all cases, except for PAL only CBSDs, they all go from 5 megahertz to 150 megahertz in terms of grant size, which makes sense. You can get a grant for, you can get granted all 150 megahertz of spectrum. So the median and average are also listed there. So, again, across all categories, you have a median of 40 megahertz and an average of about 49 megahertz for all CBSDs. If you look at the PAL only CBSDs, the median is 20, the average is 25.6, and the maximum is 40, which makes sense because PALs are only allowed up to 40 megahertz of total bandwidth. So if it was anything bigger than 40, we would have had some problems, but it's not, it's 40 as expected. But it gives you an idea that sort of the typical CBSD that's GAA only is about 40 megahertz. PAL only is about 20 megahertz. Ones that are using both are about 80 megahertz from sort of the typical perspective. So it gives you an idea of how much bandwidth CBSDs are authorized to use. So if you look at the statistics of the grants per channel, so this is the GAA grants per channel. So keep in mind that PALs are not allowed in channels 11 through 15, only GAA. But PALs are allowed below at 10 and below, and in fact have higher rights where they exist. But GAA can use channels 10 and below if it's not being used by PAL. You kind of notice the effect that there's less GAA in general, less GAA use of the bottom 10 channels because they have to work around PALs, and obviously all heavy GAA use above channel 10 and 11 through 15. The statistics still show, as they did last year, that channel 12 is really popular with the GAAs. I do not know why. If any GAA out there knows why channel 12 is so popular, please let us all know, but channel 12 is pretty popular. Channel 15 is not popular, probably because of something to do with coexistence with the neighboring 3.7 gigahertz service.
These are grants, but these are not necessarily what they're operating.
Correct. Yes, we have no feedback to tell us for absolute certain that they are operating on a particular channel. They're granted and they're allowed to operate, but there's no guarantee they actually are actually literally transmitting on that channel. If they're heart beating, but even if they're heart beating, Masood, do they indicate the power they're using on the channel at that time it's heart beating? Right.
The only thing that we know in this information is that they're heart.
Yes, correct.
They're heart beating, whether they're actually transmitting or they
We don't know. Yeah, no power is provided during the heartbeat. Channel 1 and 2, by the way, which is kind of used a fair amount by GAA. So channel 1 and 2 around the country is generally used by EchoStar. They sort of bought pretty much nationwide. CBRS used to be Dish, and now they go by EchoStar, but they have not deployed very much. And I think what's happening is that the GAA is taking advantage of that and saying, hey, channel 1 and 2 around the country really isn't used very much because EchoStar hasn't started deploying. So we might as well use them too. So similar plot for PALs. And again, PALs are not allowed in channel 11 through 15. That's why there's no stats there. So again, you see the impact of, the lower two channels are not very well occupied because EchoStar has not deployed. You notice the 5, 6, 7 channels are not really heavily used, like channel 6 and stuff like that. I don't know if this is the reason why, but I know from the ESC data that I'm privy to, the Navy likes to use channels 5 and 6 a lot for the spin 43 radar. We see it in a lot of areas that when it activates, for whatever reason, they like to use channel 5, 6. That may be reflected here. People have learned to sort of stay away from channel 5 and 6 if they can, or the SAS administrators have been saying, look, try to avoid channels 5 and 6. If you look at all of the channels combined, this is all grants and average across all channels. This is what you get. Even now, even here, PAL and GAA, you see channel 12 is popular, and you see significant reluctance to use channel 15 right against the 3.7 gigahertz service.
Hey Andy,
Yep.
on the previous slide, is there any reason you know of why channel 8 is so popular?
I do not.
Okay.
Oh, is that channel 8? You're right. Okay. Okay. So.
Okay.
So Max, for those who can't hear Max 1,000 miles away, he just uncloaked Verizon and said those are the channels that they like to use. So thank you very much, Max. Yeah. Yeah.
There was a channel plan worked out by the
Yes.
SASs, and
Yep.
those were the channels that
Yep.
we got. So.
Yep. Okay, thanks for the explanation. You guys aren't using channel 12 in GAA spectrum. That's I know, but it showed up on the other one. See that you're not using channel.
I don't, probably it could be, but I mean, I don't know why that.
Okay.
We were using channel 11 too, contiguous, so.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. It means compared to the, so what I did was I took the total number of grants, divided them by 15 channels. That gave the average, which is 65,405. So for each channel, the percentage is relative to 65,405. So, if you see a negative 1.5%, it means it's 65,405 times 0.985. It's suppressed by 1.5%. Oh, yes. You mean like going back in history and go back in history and stuff? Yeah, so somebody who's a better software engineer than me should, again, I'm not going to be doing this anymore, but actually it takes a little bit, it's not an instant, because you have to read through all 400, this giant JSON files with 400,000, you got to read through and do it. It takes 4 or 5 minutes to sort of quickly sort through all this stuff. I always thought about writing a script to go through and do it for all of the FAD data so we could look at trends in everything. Didn't get that far. So maybe Masood will offer to do that.
You should do a AI algorithm to read the FAD data.
Well, I actually suggested in the FCC Technological Advisory Council, they have an AI working group, and I suggested it would be interesting to let AI loose on the FAD data to learn about, what can we learn about how much separation is needed between uncoordinated networks and things like that, because they have grouping parameters. You can sort of suss out who's related and who's not and all this other stuff. It's still a great idea, but again, somebody else will have to follow up on. There's a lot of information in the FAD data, a lot of really good information that we really haven't sorted through very much. This is kind of a random thing, but how many CBSDs or what fraction of CBSDs are actually using the maximum allowed power, either 30 dBm per 10 megahertz or 47 dBm per 10 megahertz? What they're granted, sorry. So what they're granted. And so 91% of the Cat A GAA, which is fairly low fraction of total, is granted close to full power. Category B GAA, which is actually the largest number, about 61% are granted full power. And of course, they may not have requested full power. They don't have to request full power. But so, I had done some analysis of what they were granted versus what they requested, but there are some problems with doing it that way. So I won't go into the detail, but it wasn't very illuminating. So instead, I just did the basic of, who was within 1 dB of their max allowed power. So anyway, it's not 100% getting their full power allotment, either because they didn't request it and don't need it, or because they had to protect PALs or incumbents or whatever. So, CBRS 2.0 kicks in for CBSDs at and below 6 meter height above ground level. So it's interesting that no matter how you slice it, just about 50% of all CBSDs are at or below 6 meters. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And by the way, as far, Tao, you asked about trends. I did go back and look at the last time I gave this, which was based on August data of last year. And honestly, there's not a big difference between the numbers now and what they were back in August, like this fraction of up and below 6 meters and that channel usage thing. And the fraction, I told you the category A and the indoor went from 4.1 to 3.9. That was actually kind of the most interesting change from there. There really hasn't been a whole lot of change in the statistics since last time. And then some random statistics that don't lend themselves to bar charts. The total number of CBSD FCC IDs, which means the total number of different models of CBSDs that are in use on March 7th, is 151 different models of CBSDs. By the way, a statistic that has never been broadcast before might be of interest. Based upon the FCC ID, you can identify CPE CBSDs compared to regular CBSDs. And so if you go through and do the statistics of how many of these are CPE CBSDs, meaning that they're, WISP equipment installed on somebody's house or something like that, it's just about 32% are CPE CBSD and the other 68% are regular CBSDs, which, considering CBRS kind of originally came from the WISP industry, and went out from there, that percentage is actually pretty good. In the early days of CBRS, it used to be much higher, but it's lower. It's going down. So, but it is an interesting statistic, and I didn't write it here, but interesting. Manisha, yeah. Yep.
The entire report has GPP and non-GPP.
Avoiding that, but most of the CBSDs, I'm not so much avoiding it, but I had to be a little careful. Most of the CBSDs are not 3GPP. It's about, I didn't put it, it's calculated as part of the script. I didn't put it in the presentation, but it's, and again, I'm speaking off the top of my head, but it's like 40% are 3GPP and the other 60% are 2 proprietary technologies. Masood, tell me if I'm wrong on that, but that was what I remember from the other day when I was there. Yes.
Yep.
Basically, practically almost all of the fixed wireless usage are non-3GPP.
Yes.
And private wireless and MNO are 3GPP. So it is LTE or 5G. Of course, that number is not reflected into the FAD. So, for example, we don't have information from Google or others, but as far as related, I can say is that there is a correlation between 3GPP and non-3GPP and the use case with fixed wireless, and the other side is private wireless and MNO.
The other two, so there's 4 area interface technologies that show up in any significant number in the FAD. It is Tirana, which is a fixed wireless, Cambium, which is a fixed wireless, NR, which is 5G, and what do we call 4G?
4G
No, but what do we call it in the FAD? I forget. Anyway, we have a
EU.
E-Ultra. We call it E-Ultra in the FAD. So when you break down, if you take E-Ultra plus NR, it's about 40%. And then if you take Cambium and Tirana together, it's like 60%.
Most likely it's going to be CPE, right? That's what CPE I use.
Probably, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so half
Yeah,
are
so that does
CPE and
skew
half
the,
aren't.
yeah, that does skew the numbers.
Yeah, I'm curious then, based on that, the 151 number seems really high. How much is it you think is that? Is it different variants of the same device? Like they recertify?
I don't
it or
know,
something?
Jorg,
We've got you can look at the database and see, I mean, Cambium's got a bazillion different
Yeah.
FCC IDs in there. So does Tirana, so does Ericsson. So you can break it all down.
So, I mean, a lot of them are probably variants.
Yeah, but like one vendor can
so
have.
Max, ask
Okay.
Jorg, because he was the one who went through the list by hand and identified models that are CPE, CBSDs versus other. So he has, yeah, could be. I actually spit out
Yeah.
the whole list of 151, and there are like, -01, -02, but it's actually, a little more random than I would have thought. It's not like you get a whole sequence of -01, -02, -03.
Yeah, EDAN, I'll see if I can find it, but EDAN made a presentation about all that a couple of years ago. So the numbers have blown up since then, but a couple of years ago, EDAN from Airspan made
Yeah.
a presentation about that. It was pretty fascinating, at least to me.
Yeah, but talk to Jorg if you want details of how many really different models there are. And then statistics that people may or may not care about. The average antenna beam width is 71 degrees. The median antenna beam width is 65. The average antenna gain is 14.8, and the median is 13. So, just some random statistics there. There's a lot more information in the FAD. Some of it we can't really, all of the SaaS operators have to agree to release these data because, none of these data belong to any one company. And so, we don't want to get too detailed, and you have to be a little careful about the kind of data we're able to release. But at this level, we release it. Maybe in the future, Masood and the SaaS administrators will start to release more detailed data. Rich.
Yeah, Andy, great overview. The bandwidth, the channel assignments that were 10, 20, up to 40, is that approximately correct? That's been the general assignment process here?
For PALs.
Yes, for PALs.
Yeah, for PALs, they up to 40 megahertz.
Okay.
Yeah. And there are PAL or PAL grants that are as little as 5 megahertz. I don't know what people are doing with 5 megahertz, but there are some out
Okay,
there.
but that strikes me as being pretty compatible with the 600 megahertz being talked about in the release of frequencies for auction as, 50, 75 megahertz, et cetera. Is that a finding or a conclusion you would reach? Or?
No, because I think they're two different things. One is like the bulk amount of bandwidth they want to make available for auction of some kind. And this is like looking at how much bandwidth an individual CBSD is granted.
Okay.
And also we're limited by rule. I mean, the reason
To
that
40
is
yeah.
a rule. I mean,
It's a rule.
if they gave us more, we would
Yeah.
take more. But
PALs can only use, it's the same thing in the 3.45 gigahertz band right now. It changes in a couple of years or something, but yeah, they're limited to 40 megahertz.
But the
Correct, and that's what that's
Yeah.
what they're doing, yeah.
you see there's 80
Yeah.
and 65. Yeah.
But there's a market being served here.
Yes.
Don't-
Reflect.
No, I wouldn't look at it that way. I would look at the PAL plus GAA numbers as to what the desire is, right? Don't look at PAL only because
Right, but I think that's what he
restricted
said,
by
yeah.
law.
I mean, obviously, the PALs are often going out and using both. I mean, you saw from that earlier chart, the PALs are also grabbing GAA spectrum because they want more. Richard,
If you are, like in our group, you're using grouping, so you're using the same grant on the same frequency for an AP that's talking to 10 and 20 CPE that are all on the same band. Is
Yes.
that considered a separate grant for each of
Yes.
those?
considered a
your
separate
numbers?
grant. Yes, they're separate CBSDs, they're considered separate grants.
Even though they're on the same frequency?
Yes, as long as they're separate CBSDs, as far as my grant total goes, that's counted as different grants.
But you don't count it as separate frequency allocations?
I do. I count it as a different grant.
Yeah, but you have two different charts. You have one, which is how much frequency they're using, 20, 40, 80. The other one is that whether or not they're getting a grant.
All of this is a per CBSD basis. Even if the CBSDs, if there's, a bunch of the same grouping parameter, I count them as separate CBSDs. So, yeah. I see what you're getting at, that there's, you could argue it's a system that's using 20 megahertz, not a CBSD. But yeah, that's not, we could do that because the grouping parameters are in the FAD. But
in order to figure out how many sort of unique users and to CBSDs there are,
yeah,
you have a number there of about 1 million something at one point.
yeah, million,
We'd have
1.2
to
million. grants.
depreciate that by the number of things where there's two ends and figure out how many of them
Correct.
are CPEs.
Correct. Yeah. Now in our filing in the OnGo and WInnForum, or OnGo, I can't remember, either OnGo or WInnForum, I did an analysis and I looked at all of the CBSD's grouping parameters and error interface technologies and tried to look at how close two CBSDs can be that are using different technologies but operating on the adjacent channel. Because the question was, how important are these out-of-band emission limits? Are the limits very constraining? And it turns out that adjacent channel CBSDs, two different error interface technologies with two different grouping parameters, can operate actually pretty close together without causing interference to each other, indicating that out-of-band emissions, we see instances of them on the same tower, for example. So out-of-band emissions don't really seem to be a controlling factor here. We filed that with, I can't remember, it was either OnGo or WInnForum. We filed that with our comments. So anyway, that's it. Thought we would do the statistics. Masood, you can take it over from here and give it the next time.
Yeah.
But hopefully we'll see.
Yeah. So if I can add one. So maybe it's good to mention, and people are aware. Again, we have this statistic that Andy was talking about, especially in terms of the PAL usage, GA usage, and the number of CBSD total grants. So we have all those information mapped to every county in the country, and that is available. I want to raise the point that
Masood, when you say who's publishing that now?
well, we discussed that in the OnGo Alliance on behalf of SAS admins.
So it's going to be OnGo.
Yeah. So we on behalf of SAS admins. But I wanna add, kind of give a couple of concern in terms of the total number of 10 megahertz channels. There are some counties that we are using a significant number, as close as 200 gigahertz of CBRS usage, spectrum usage. So 200 gigahertz means about 20,000 multiplied by 10 megahertz. So it means 200 megahertz of channel usage by all CBSDs inside one county. We have counties like that, as well as counties that we have practically no usage of the CBRS. Most of the counties which are on the kind of the north Midwest, like the north of the country, in the kind of middle side, that we have practically no usage, especially PAL is almost zero. But the rest of the country, we have a good usage of the band. So what we are going to do, we are going to populate that as well as we are going to normalize that per population, per county to give kind of a better view. So we are going to release that information on Ongo Alliance, and later we'll talk to SaaS admins and others to see if how we can put it on WInnForum. But following the discussion that we had yesterday, it is very important that we watch the actual deployment and usage, especially on the PAL side. I think this is very critical and key for the future success of CBRS, plus the further relaxation and further improvement in CBRS to show that how we can increase the kind of revenue from CBRS as a whole ecosystem. To me, these are very important. We will show that as data later. Hopefully we can have more discussion in next meetings.
Cool. All right. Anyway, that's it. Lee, over to you. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Can I make a suggestion as to some other metrics which I think would be quite useful?
Very helpful if you do that. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll tell you offline because I think even within Spectrum X, as we've talked about CBRS, we've come up with, wouldn't be really nice if we had this data.
Yeah, I think as I mentioned yesterday in the meeting, we individual SaaS admins and overall, by the way, other SaaS admins, please correct me if I'm saying anything which is not accurate. We have two limitations. We have two limitations in providing data. Number one limitation is that we cannot provide any information that reveals federal incumbent activity. We are limited by OPSEC. Of course, there is an exception. We can provide that to federal NTIA, DOD, FCC if they request us. And the second information that we cannot provide is specifics about one particular operator. Mm-hmm. So we cannot give any information that reveals Verizon or whoever else specific deployment information, except they come back and say we are okay to share it. So we don't share that, but any other information is available, and you can talk to us. If you let us know what type of metric would be useful,
one of the
we can
things
work.
Would be, how often, what percentage of devices are on the move list, or are requested to move.
All those informations are, we have already provided that to government. So
okay.
all those informations are available. We have already provided like all the characteristic, and also I have provided some information to Ongo Alliance. We can mention that here later in terms of, for example, the move list size. What was the difference between before CBRS 2.0 and now after CBRS 2.0? Those informations.
One thing to keep in mind with the details of like the move list, the list and thing, those are specific to a SaaS. So that's not, the FAD data doesn't reveal that. So you'd have to go to each individual SaaS and get all the move list data. Yeah.
But I mean, as long as it doesn't touch those two issues that I mentioned, we can talk about that, I think.
Is there any way to anonymize some of the federal data? Meaning, I get OPSEC, I don't want to violate, like, best county, worst county, average percentage, or something that doesn't give away anything that they would consider.
My suggestion is this. If Lee, if you can find a way, SaaS admins have all of those information. So if you can find a way that we can,
or the ESC operators do at least.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, of course, SaaS admins do not have information about activation of DPS. ESC operators, but currently there are 3 ESC who happens to be SaaS administrators as well. So, but in theory, Andy is right. Yeah. My suggestion is that if people can put together a kind of what type of kind of data is valuable for the ecosystem. Among SaaS admins, we can talk and see if it doesn't touch any sensitivity stuff, we will be happy to work on that and sanitize that and anonymize that and provide to the public.
All right, Lee.
Yeah, so I was just going to show this. They were mentioning the FCC ID. So every single piece of equipment that had to go through certification is in the equipment authorization database, and it's all public. So here it is. I just pulled it up on my browser. You can see, Ericsson, it's somewhere on here. Here we go. So for this FCC ID, that's the original equipment authorization. And so if you go all the way over here, here's the entire report on the equipment authorization for those of you who don't know how it works. And then, correct me if I'm wrong about this, Virgil, but then every time they had to go through a permissive change, so class 2 permissive change, there's class 3 permissive change up there. Every time they went through a permissive change, they refiled the information associated with that. And so that's why you have the same FCC ID in the database multiple times. But
that doesn't affect the count of 151 because we only
right.
we
But
go
what
by,
I'm saying is you can actually go through here and look for unique FCC IDs and then match that against the 151 to see, like, did somebody build something that was never deployed? Does one piece of equipment in here get deployed all the time? And if so, what's it
And
look
that
like?
151, was that ones that had grants or just in the database?
had grants, had active
Had grants.
And Max, if you want, I will even email you the list of all 151 and you can look at it.
Andy, I don't recall. We have an API actually. We don't need to do this even.
Yeah, there's a CBRS API.
There is an API that FCC has generated.
Yeah.
Shosan, do you think that that's specific to SAS admins or it's public?
No,
Yeah,
that's public.
Oh, it is? I
If
thought
it
that
is-
was
if it
SAS
is
admins
public,
only.
No, you just have to have a core. You just have to have a cores login, I believe, for that one, and you can get.
Let me check with OAT lab.
Yeah,
people.
because
Let me check with FCC OAT lab.
I've been doing some of this stuff. I was working with Idan on some of this stuff. Well,
You
I
don't
wasn't
have
working
to.
with
I mean,
Idan
the-
was doing some of this stuff and he was doing it manually.
The API, there is a KDB, which is public. There is a KDB, I can share with you that FCC KDB that describes the API.
Yep.
Whether the access to the API is public or only SAS admin can do
No,
that.
it's public, and it's the same API is now also used for 6
For 6
gigahertz
gigahertz.
AFC.
So let me
yeah.
check. If that API is available, I'll send you the KDB anyways.
Then we can take the 150 and.
Huh?
Yes,
Sorry? It's available.
it's available. It's
Whether
public.
access to API is also possible for others.
Might be, I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, it's public.
So you don't have to do this because in the API, all of these are summarized. So
Okay.
you provide an FCC ID, it gives you all of the bandwidth designator.
Well, that would
power
make things
levels.
a lot easier.
It's
Yeah.
very easy. And
But
you
it's specific to CBRS. The reason you use this
Specific
is
to
if you
CBRS.
want to search for specific frequency ranges for other types of things, you have to
Yeah, so
use this.
So this here that I pulled up is just CBRS Cat A and Cat B.
Right, right.
But you
Yeah, but
can-
that API is very simple.
But the API, you can't go and say, okay, show me all the Ericsson. It doesn't work that way. It's you put in an FCC ID and it gives you what that device is and what it's capable of. That's what the SASs use to confirm that when you requested a particular power level for your grant, that it's consistent with what the equipment authorization allows. That's the purpose of that API.
But if I wanted to know what all the Ericsson FCC IDs were.
No, it doesn't work
then-
that way.
Then I'd have to do
You got
that.
it. You have to do
You
it
have to
this
do
way.
this. And
Yeah.
you can dump this whole
Yes.
database and then search
Right.
it in. you know,
Yep.
Do your normal.
But if you have an FCC ID, you can go to the FCC, you can go to the CBRS API, and the same thing with the 6 gigahertz. If you have a 6 gigahertz device, FCC ID, you can go there. And by the way, if you're interested in APIs, you can get all the information about the fixed satellite service sites that we are required to protect in CBRS. There's also a specialized API for that. It's
the
all,
6
it's all
gigahertz and the CBRS API are the same API.
same
right?
API.
Okay.
Yep, same API. Okay, I know everybody wants